Hi, friends. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm so excited for this interview today. My guest is Dr. Molly Parker. She's another podcast guest that I can thank Ali Rayum for introducing me to. So shout out to Ali. You've not led me astray yet with these amazing people that you've connected me with. So thank you for that. I'm so excited. Dr. Molly Parker is a physical therapist and the owner of Concussion Compass. Her focus and drive for advancing concussion care began in 2011 when she was hit by a cab as a pedestrian. Struggling to find care or explain what she was experiencing, she learned firsthand how big the gaps in concussion treatment were. After years of frustration and setbacks, she decided to create for others the solutions she wished she'd had. So thank you so much for being here, Molly. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's just start with you sharing a little bit more about you. What got you interested in physical therapy? How long had you been practicing prior to your injury?
So I always knew I wanted to be in the medical field in some way. I have a pretty medical family. My mom's a nurse and my dad's a dentist and my sister was in medical school at the time. But I've always loved teaching and I've always loved movement. And so I ended up being a soccer player, spraining my ankles a lot. And that was kind of my first introduction into physical therapy. Mm-hmm. And then I actually still want to be a marine biologist. I think it was like all the millennials watching Free Willy.
I love it.
So I ended up in school kind of not knowing what I wanted to do. And then the advisor saying, you're taking a lot of kinesiology classes and that's pre-physical therapy, pre-med. And so I went and shadowed this man named Kerry Bucko, love him to death. And he just loved his job and the patients loved him. And I'd ask him questions and he'd come out with like highlighted books and models. And so that's kind of what sold it for me. So I went to PT school and then I got kind of my dream job in this small orthopedic clinic in a beach town. I treated a lot of surfers. It was very high level. I was almost too intimidated to take the job, but I was like, you can stretch yourself, you can do this. And then a month and a half later, I was hit by a car. So I wasn't practicing for very long before I had my accident. And I think for me, that's part of where it got sticky is because I wasn't in a place where people knew me. I was in a place, I just moved there. It's my new job. I'm trying to prove that I can do it. And yeah, it pretty quickly took a turn.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so sorry. So tell us a little bit more about what happened there. Got hit by a vehicle, but yeah, how long ago was that? And tell us.
It's been 13 years. It's been a long time. So it was in 2011 and it was a cab driver who fell asleep at the wheel and drove into the crowd. And at the time, I had just graduated, so I had my doctorate in physical therapy, but we didn't go over concussions. We go through severe TBI, moderate TBI. We don't do concussions because at the time, we all thought concussions just go away. And so I'm picking myself off the hood of the car thinking, gosh, I'm so lucky. Little did I know what that could turn into. And it just, I think I took a day off work. They had me in like a collar for a day. And then I just went back to things as usual, but I was still extremely symptomatic in virtually every way you could be. And it just, I could go into the whole thing, but I don't know if we want to break it up into chunks because it was just, I felt like I'd been hit by a car. That feels like, one would imagine. And I was having memory stuff. I had a lot of cognitive stuff, but I didn't realize it. So I was kind of just going through the motions, but I don't think I was in a place where I could have taken myself out of it and given myself the rest and space and care that I needed. Mm-hmm. And I was around a bunch of people who didn't know me. So yeah, it was very tricky. I ended up going to, a doctor. They kind of said it'll go away. They were more worried about my legs because they were kind of banged up from the accident. And then it just, I turned into the horror story. My symptoms got worse. No one knew what to do. I didn't have the language to explain what I was experiencing. When I went to clinicians and different physicians who were all wonderful, they didn't understand it. And so just no one really knew what to do. And so I really ended up just everything gradually getting worse and worse and worse. Vision, vestibular, memory, POTS. I developed a movement disorder, pretty significant cognitive stuff. My IQ dropped 2 standard deviations by the time we measured it. I was in a really bad way and I just couldn't get myself out of it. And no one else really knew what to do.
Okay. Holy cow. All right. Let's back up just a second here. When it happened, did you go to an ER or did an ambulance come and check people out? Like, were you diagnosed with a concussion right away? What was that like?
Yeah. So they hit about 20 people. So it was quite, there was just a bunch of ambulances and I was triaged kind of to the end. I'd lost memory. I was doing well. I'd gone with a girlfriend to the bathroom who'd broken her nose, and I looked at her and was like, did something bad happen? I completely forgot. So she brought me to a firefighter who put me on a backboard, who then I was taken to the ER. And I remember as a starving student being like, I'll take an Uber. I just can't afford that ride. Oh. But in hindsight, I was really glad that they did that. And if you're ever in that situation, you want to make sure that you do take those precautions, not only for your own health, but then later for like insurance purposes or anything like that. You want to go to the ER. So I went there. And I think on the next morning I was discharged, and in my paperwork, it said I'd had a concussion, but I have no memory of that being spoken about to me.
Okay. That's interesting. And I mean, it's possible that they did and you just don't remember, but it's also very possible that it was just written in the paperwork and you didn't get talked to about it. So you took a day off of work, and then how long? It sounds like the symptoms started pretty soon. Was it like all of them all at once, or they developed them over the time?
It was a little bit of both. So initially, a lot of pain, headache, neck pain, because I'd been, hit by a vehicle. So there was a lot of that. And then the typical, that 7 to 10 days, you start to see some symptoms resolve. I remember at about 2 weeks feeling better and going for a run and just doubling over in pain. But again, being so cognitively affected that I couldn't take myself out of it and say, something's wrong, or I need to stop, or let's get this investigated. You just kind of I kept going through the motions, almost like I was in default mode. And I began, I did see a primary doctor. They didn't really know what to do. I saw a functional medicine doctor. They didn't know what to do. And then my symptoms over the next probably 6 months just got progressively worse and worse and worse each week.
And nobody was recognizing what it was. Yeah.
So memory kicked in. I would kind of black out while I was treating and feel like I'd lost consciousness, and then kind of come to, and I was still fine and standing and talking and no one noticed. And I was losing consciousness from POTS, but we didn't know that at the time. So I developed severe POTS. Several months in, my left side got really weak, which was the start of the movement disorder. I was going to see different people during this time, and everyone just kept telling me there's nothing wrong. And I was like, I am very sure there is something wrong. I stopped sleeping. I was in severe pain. I would go in my kitchen and all the cupboards would be open and I'd have no memory of doing it. I was actively saying I was okay. And everyone just kind of, after a while, it was like old hat and no one really took it seriously or made accommodations. And I got stuck in that pretty quick, I would say.
Do you feel like that's because people didn't know you well enough? They didn't know the pre-injury you? And
I think it was a big mix of both. I think I looked normal, and I think that's tough for people. And I think people didn't know me well enough to know that if I'm saying there's a problem, there's a problem. I'm also very stoic. So I'm not the person that's going to be like sobbing in tears. I'm going to tell you with a straight face there's a problem. And so unless you know that about me, people tend to take it as less of what it is, I guess you should say.
Yeah.
So I think it was, it was all those things.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting and good point just to bring up, that everybody's going to respond to these things differently. The way that they're going to ask for help is going to be different. And yeah, I guess just to, in general, take people seriously when they tell you what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
How long were you able to keep up with that job then?
I worked for 2 years, and I don't know how. I worked that job 40 hours a week, and then I did another part-time job on top of that to take over my medical bills and home health. And I shouldn't have been working longer than like a month. It was so severe. And I just remember feeling so trapped because it's like, I can't take a day off because this is something that's going to take way more than a day. But if I quit my job, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to pay my rent?
Yeah.
And I was 26, 27 by this point. And, I have a supportive family and backup there. So, they would have helped, but I couldn't process that on my own. And so I started eventually seeing a psychologist, and she started saying the blatantly obvious things that I couldn't process on my own. And I was like, oh, and I kind of started to realize the situation I was in. But I mean, I was wearing the same clothes multiple days in a row because I couldn't change. Like, I didn't have the stamina to change them. I wasn't eating a lot of the times because I didn't have the stamina to make food. I wasn't sleeping. I was in severe, severe pain. And I would just wake up and keep doing it. And I could make it look normal enough because I looked healthy, even though I look back, I'm like, I don't know how I did it for a day. And I couldn't do it like that for even a day now.
I don't know how you did that. Yeah,
I don't either. You focus 10 seconds ahead of you and you just keep going. And
wow. Were you living by yourself at this time? Like, did you have?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I was living by myself. I didn't know many people in the area. My family kind of got it, but they kind of didn't. Like when I had to move home, and they were like, we didn't understand it was that bad because I wasn't verbalizing it well. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of, fell through the cracks that way. And I went to multiple doctors, but no one knew what to do.
Oh my gosh. So I guess, well, I want to dive into more. I would love to hear more about the movement disorder, if you don't mind sharing about that, and POTS, but let's get to that in a second. One of the questions that I usually ask people is, how much did you know about concussions prior to this experience? And what about the experience surprised you? And it sounds like not a lot was known ahead of time, and
right.
not a lot was known by the doctors either that you were going to. Yeah. So what surprised you about this, and what was, everything surprising me here.
And still surprises me to this day is the magnitude of how much you can be suffering and how normal you can look. It's still like, I remember at one point I was in a restaurant and I could barely function, and I, couldn't do the noise, couldn't do anything. I'm getting hot flashes. I feel like I'm going to throw up. And I walk in the bathroom and I look in the mirror, and because I had hot flashes, my cheeks were like lightly pink. I looked dewy and like great. And I was like, it just blows my mind how bad I can be feeling. I was like in and out of consciousness. And then I looked like I just like had my makeup done. And I was just like, and it blows my mind how I think it's hard for people who haven't been through it to imagine the severity of what someone can be experiencing when they look and move the way that person does. You know what I mean? So I think that surprised me, and I think it still surprises me. And it's important for people to understand. And I didn't know what they could turn into. I didn't understand everything involved. Knowing what I know now, I would have done it so different. But at the time, you just didn't have the knowledge. So when I meet people now and they say, oh God, like that's been a long time, I'm like, well, keep in mind, like my Instagram page, more there on like 3 slides than I did in the first like 7 years. So it's really, there's no better time to have a concussion and be recovering from it than right now in history. We've learned a lot. And I think it would be a lot different had I had the exact same accident today versus, back then.
I hope it would be a lot different. And that's a really good point. I appreciate you saying that there's so much more knowledge and so many more people who understand it, who want to help. That's huge.
Yeah. You couldn't even Google it back then. It would show up as a psychological disorder. And there was no books, there was no websites. Like 3 years in, there was one woman, and I found like an old blog, and I would like read it all the time. She'd stopped posting, but it was the only person I'd ever even heard of, because that information didn't exist.
Wow. Holy cow. So, and I do want to actually, why don't you tell us now, what would you tell yourself if you could go back in time? What would you say to your early self about this? What advice do you have?
I think I came from like one of the generations. I'm like an elder millennial where we just kind of pushed through and we did what we were supposed to do, and productivity was worth, and we didn't make waves. And when I talk to people who are like in their early to mid 20s now, when they have stuff going on, they take breaks. I'm like, I just never would have done that. And I don't know why. And so if I could go back, I would let myself know, like, your health is the most important thing and you need to hold space for that fiercely. And you're worth having space for that. You should not be suffering the way you're suffering, waiting for people to understand or give you permission. That permission needs to come from you because you value, yourself, and you value your health. And I think that's probably my biggest learning throughout this process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And if someone had told you that, do you think you would have listened? I'm just curious if that.
I think if someone had told me that and they'd like supported it, I think I would have. I think part of it was I didn't understand what I was experiencing, and I didn't have that bird's eye view. Like, I couldn't zoom out and see the big picture. I was so in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think eventually I had that psychologist who was able to give me that view. I think that would have been really helpful. And I think having someone around me validate it would have been huge for me at the time. I think I probably needed that still at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell us more about the journey. So you worked and pushed through for 2 years,
mm-hmm.
and then what happened?
It was a breaking point. I ended up finally getting to a neuropsychologist, and that was my first diagnosis about 2 years in. And at the time, apparently she'd written that I needed vision therapy, like I had severe vision stuff come up, and my doctor just told me to see a psychologist. So that didn't get back to me for like 2 more years after that. So I think I started to realize how bad it was, and I started to advocate for myself a little bit. And as I started to advocate for myself, I realized that my boss at the time really wasn't supportive and probably wasn't going to be. And so it just got to the point where I couldn't do it another day. And I remember thinking, if I keep going like this, I'm going to die. Like, it's so severe. I can't do it anymore. And once that switch happened, then we tried a little bit of a go part-time, but they wanted me to work like at the times when I was physically the worst, almost like prove myself that I wanted to be there. And I was like, that's not how this is working though. And we're in healthcare and we know this. And it was really it was very confusing at the time. I was so young. And I had idolized my boss at the time. But I think once I realized how bad it was, I went home and I was sleeping for 16 hours a day. My sister was an ER doctor at the time. She'd check to make sure I was breathing. And I still felt, and as soon as I got to the point where I wasn't horrific, but I was really bad, I felt too guilty not to go back to work. I was just in this mindset of I couldn't stop. And it took me years to get out of that. And so I went back to work. I felt really judged. No one really acknowledged its existence.
Were you at home at this point? You went to a different job?
I went home for a month and then I went back. And I remember thinking, I went back to Southern California. So I went to Washington for a month and I went back to Southern California. It's almost like I just couldn't comprehend how bad of a state I was in and that I needed a lot more time. No one knew what to do. So it wasn't like there was an action plan. And even now, I can't really put it into words other than I was just on complete default mode. I just wasn't stopping to really understand what I was experiencing. And I think that was part of the cognitive difficulties as well. So I went back, I started some home health. That did not go well, as you can imagine. And I remember at one point, I was working with a patient and I couldn't tell if she was falling or I was falling. And it was me having the sensation of falling and everyone was safe and everyone was fine. But I was I put somebody at risk and I stopped right after that. And just, then started the years of going to doctors. No one knew what to do. Eventually I had to move home again. I was home for years. I was bedbound by that point. I couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't drive. It took me a long time to convince people how severe it was. I think that was a huge part of it. And I saw doctor after doctor after doctor. I was actively advocating for myself. I had some okay experiences, a lot of bad experiences, some where they believed me but just didn't know how to help. And eventually, I think year 4, I met the first doctor who kind of knew what was happening and could explain it to my family and could explain it to me. And all of a sudden I had the language and he introduced me to more people and it kind of snowballed from there. And then I eventually started to learn what I was experiencing and why. I started to see some research come out that was actually understood the injury and they could give you tangible things. Yeah. And it was just over the years, I started to meet people who knew what they were doing and could put language to what I was experiencing, because it was just very foreign. Like now I look at it, I'm like, oh, I was experiencing this, this, and this, like easy peasy. This was the treatment. But at the time you didn't know, and you were just in this world of mess. So yeah. So eventually I finally met people who knew what they were doing. I think year 6 or 7 is when I got diagnosed with like POTS and the movement disorder. But it took me, probably like 7 years to have people who understood the pieces of what was happening.
Holy cow. Well, that's quite an adventure you've been on.
Yeah. I haven't talked about it in that detail in a while. And I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how just intense that was.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too. I want to just like bring up this point that when you went to talk to your work, the old, your first job after you went, well, I don't know if it was before or after you went home, but when they were trying to give you some accommodations, I could see why it would be very confusing for you and for them to be like, what is happening right now? You're like, this was something that happened 2 years ago, and now you're just bringing this up. Like, I can see how that would be very. People wouldn't understand that.
Well, I was actively like, there was issues the whole time. So it's not like we didn't know. They'd treat me here and there. Later on, I think it was more my boss's issues, because that's happened with several other people, not including me. But I didn't understand at the time. I was like young and naive and eager. And yeah.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned getting diagnosed, and they like recommended vision therapy and stuff. Was you got diagnosed with a concussion at that point? Was it something different?
At that point, I was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome, which of course the name has changed now. But that was at the 2-year mark. And so I went back to my doctor who had the report, and he told me just to go see a psychologist. And then a couple years later, I needed that report for disability. And I read it, and I was like, oh my God, she's picked this stuff up and she recommended treatment, and I wasn't told.
That's frustrating and very unfortunate. Yeah. I'm so sorry. But interesting that they're, you knew what it was, but it sounds like you still didn't know what to do with it until.
Yeah. So then I had the diagnosis, and then you do what you do and you Google it, and there was no information. It was all the websites listed it as a psychological disorder. And I was like, I'm a PT. I know my body. I know how it was working before. I know something's wrong. I know it's not just psychological. I have no doubt that not getting treatment and my life going the way it's going is mentally challenging too, but that's very situational.
Right.
So I knew something wasn't quite right, and I knew I couldn't be the only person experiencing it. There just wasn't. I mean, I'd look up books. There was one on like hot yoga and chiropractic, and that was it. Like there was not concussion information out there. And even the major, like at Mayo Clinic, had it listed as psychological. And like they're just, even when I knew, there was still nobody else like me and no information out there. And I would scour the research, like waiting to find stuff come up. And eventually it started to, but that was all on my own.
Holy cow. So when you did find somebody who knew what to do, well, actually, I'm curious, you said that you went back to Southern California, you tried working for a little while, and then decided that wasn't working, and you went home. How long were you bedbound and at home?
Several years. So I think I went
so
home.
No working at that point, I assume.
No working. So I went home at year 3. My mom had to come up. I couldn't drive, so she had to drive me back. It was a bit of a transition at home because they didn't totally understand the severity of it. Neither did I. Everyone's looking at you to explain it. I'm like, I don't understand the problem. I just know I can barely function, and I don't know how to explain visual symptoms to people that aren't like blurry vision. Like it's, it's my eyes aren't tracking, and like, but I understand it now, but I couldn't explain that then. And I had speech issues, and it was just like this perfect storm. So then I was deemed permanently disabled like year 5. And I was probably bedbound for like 3 years.
And that's got to be so hard emotionally and mentally too. Were you getting any kind of psychotherapy or anything like to help you?
Yeah. So I'd seen a psychologist when I was 18 for like a month over a boy. And then when I got home, I was like, I liked her. And so I went back to her. And so I've been seeing her for 10 years now. I love her. So she's walked me through kind of all of it. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm so glad.
I went once a week.
Good. Very, very good. And you were able to get out, like you were able to go and do a visit like that.
My parents would pick me up and drop me off and then pick me up again because I couldn't drive. So it was hard being losing your independence like that. And I don't like, it took them a while. I have really wonderful parents, but it took them a while to understand it too, and understand the severity, and then understand how to kind of meet my needs. My mom was a nurse, so I think she was pretty, Johnny on the spot with it, but it took everyone a while to understand like what was happening. Or I'd get comments like, oh, I guess I'm driving again. And, and we talk about it, and then I would never hear it. They learned and they supported me as best they could. And so, but it was a transition when I got back for sure.
Oh, I believe it. And I guess that is a question that I wanted to ask you about. And if there's any more that you want to share on it, like how did this injury affect the people closest to you? I mean, sounds like it took some time to figure out what the transition looked like.
There was some family members, it was easier than others. And some it did cause some issues. And it took us some time to work through that. So that was tough. And then other ones kind of got it right away. It took us a while to find like our new homeostasis. And I think too, what both my parents have mentioned is that once they understood how bad it was and they understood like what was happening, they felt a little bit of a sense of guilt that they didn't know. And so I think other people's families can feel that too. And it's just, they didn't know. But what they've always done is they've believed me and they learn. And so, they're open to learning. They're open to communicating. It's not, well, then I guess I'm just not good enough. It's not any of that kind of nonsense. It is, we're learning and figuring it out together. And that's, really what you need.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think something that I have heard people talk about before, that just believing and being open to learning about it is huge. Like it makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as you were finally getting diagnosed with things, people recognizing, okay, this is what's actually happening with you, what treatments or therapies were helpful? Like what helped you?
The next big issue was that there wasn't treatment locally. So there was the neurofeedback guy who started, who was wonderful. But then I needed vision and I needed vestibular and I had a movement disorder, and there really wasn't anyone in the area for that. And so for a short time I traveled. I would go, like I went to, a clinic in Utah when we didn't really know what was happening. And then we realized I had the movement disorder. And then so I started seeing a guy in San Diego who was lovely, but I don't think was going to treat in the way that it was going to resolve. And then about year 6, I knew I had a movement disorder. I had enough treatment where my IQ came back, and then all of a sudden I could see things clearly. And then I was like, oh, I had a sensory motor disorder. Then all of a sudden, like I was me again, and I could like figure out what was happening. Whereas before I didn't have the cognitive capacity to.
What got you that back?
I went to a clinic in Utah who I did like a week-long therapy thing there, and the movement stuff got worse, but my IQ and my cognitive stuff got significantly better. And so with that, then I was able to like manage my own care significantly better, whereas I just didn't have the faculties to do it up until that point. So then I realized I had a movement disorder. So then I could reach out to a movement disorder specialist. And I eventually went to a conference where I was meant to meet with this woman who I'd been corresponding with. And it finished early. And she said, why don't you come and share your story with everyone, and maybe people will know how to help. And so I went, and I was shaking at that point. I had a full-blown movement disorder. I looked like I'd had a stroke. And there was a woman in the audience who was like, we know what that is and we treat it. And we partner with UCLA and you should come see us. And that's kind of the people who've gotten me to where I am today.
Wow. Do you feel comfortable or want to share? We can take this out if you don't want to. Do you want to share the places that you went to that were helpful for you, or would you rather not?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is I just needed consistent care from someone who understood how to integrate multiple systems, because I had visual issues, I had vestibular issues. So reactive physical therapy in LA has been far and away the best help for me. It's where I'm at right now. I'm doing really well. They think I should make a full recovery within 4 months or so. So I'm kind of hand over fist improving, which just goes to show I just needed consistent care and a little stability. And, it's crazy that it took this long. And I think I always preface it when people meet me. I'm like, this is not going to be you. The landscape was so different. And I can give you in a half an hour what it took me 10 years to learn. So we really can get there quickly, but it took me a very long time to find people who actually knew what they were doing. And I was so involved at that point that it really, you needed someone who really knew their stuff. So reactive physical therapy in LA has by far been the best. They also do free consults if anyone is curious if it would be a fit for them. They do intensives where you can travel there that's covered by insurance. So it's not these like thousands and thousands of dollars things. I saw a man in Oregon who was helpful, named Dr. Glenn Zielinski. He was wonderful and kind of went above and beyond. That was helpful. Those are probably the two main ones. I saw some other people who I think meant well, but the treatment wasn't matching necessarily what I needed. But yeah, those are probably the two main ones.
Biggest ones. Thank you. So that's awesome. And we can link, hopefully find those, the reactive physical therapy and Glenn Zielinski and link to them in the show notes as well. So once you, actually, I would love to hear, was the movement disorder that you had given a specific name, or was it just a movement disorder?
It was called a functional movement disorder. So they think it was just, my body didn't know where I was spaced. My vision wasn't processing. My vestibular wasn't processing. I didn't know where I was. So my body would create a motion to try to figure out where I was in space. And now it's mostly we're working on the principles of just so our bodies are represented in our brains. For those who don't know, it's called your homunculus. And there's a little strip where every part of your body is represented there. And so when it's well-defined, we're moving well. When it's a little bit blurry, we can have things like pain, or in my case, a movement disorder. So my brain's vision of my body is very blurry. So we're trying to clear up the edges. And the more we do that, the better and better I feel, and the better we coordinate it with vision, and the better we coordinate it with vestibular. My autonomic system has gotten back online. So it's all kind of getting there.
Has that impacted the POTS as well?
Yeah, the POTS has improved significantly. I almost wonder if we test it now if I still have it, because it's improved quite a bit. But yeah.
That's fantastic. So tell us for people who are not familiar with POTS or who may, be experiencing symptoms of it and not know what they're experiencing, can you explain what it is and how it affected you?
Yeah, so POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it's an autonomic disorder. So your autonomic system is the one responsible for all those things that you don't think about, like your blood pressure and your heart rate and your respiratory rate, and matching those with how you're moving through the world. So there's different types. For me, I tend to have more of the blood volume type issues. So when I'm upright, I get a lot of pooling down in my legs. That's where the blacking out was coming from, is that I wasn't getting enough blood flow. So it's treated usually by, lots of water, salt for me, because it was such a blood volume issue. And then rehab, which I'm a big proponent of. I think where we miss things is when we just do medication or we just do kind of lifestyle stuff and we don't actually help the autonomic nervous system learn how to retrain, because we can do that. So I think that's probably been the biggest thing that has helped.
Did you wear compression stockings and stuff like that?
I did. Yeah. I wore compression socks. We started positionally with certain things. So I had the movement disorder too. So that made it really tricky. And I also had pretty severe vision stuff and pretty severe vestibular, which is like our balance systems in the body. So they started me in ways that integrated all those systems. So it was a little tricky. So it was a lot of on your back, quadruped stuff in the beginning. They progressed me to standing, then where I can move up and down out of positions, because that's really challenging for POTS. So, and then, progressed into walking and walking longer. And so I've just started running in the last couple of weeks.
That's huge.
Jump roping. So yeah, we're getting there.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So when did that start changing? How long have you been dealing with the POTS, with all these things?
Yeah, so I was dealing with all those things, and then I'd seen reactive year 6, year 7. It helped quite a bit. And then I'd gone back home, and then I'd done the week in Oregon, which helped a little bit more. Then there was kind of the pandemic. So I kind of came out of that not feeling super hot. So I ended up moving up to LA and be like, can we just knock this out? So I've been here for about a year now. And lo and behold, I get consistent treatment and I'm in a reasonably consistent state and things are improving really well, which just I'm so grateful for. And part of me is like, oh my God, this is all we needed the whole time. It was such a journey to get the basics.
Yeah.
And that's really why I do what I do now, is because it was just super unnecessary.
Yeah. So tell us about what you do now, because I'm curious. as a PT going through this kind of therapy stuff, I imagine your brain is probably like, oh, okay, I could do this. I could do this. Like, do you want to do what they do at reactive physical therapy? Or are you like, tell us about Concussion Compass?
Yeah. So I started in 2018. I started doing just concussion education because it was when I was starting to get a little bit of help. I was realizing what had happened. I had time to process it. I'd come out kind of the personal growth side. I'd done a lot of that. My relationships had kind of stabilized again. And it was like, I just can't stand the fact that people are going to end up in the situation I am just because they didn't have the information. So I started just an Instagram account that I prepped for like 6 months because I had such little function at the time. And I figured out what I wanted to do and just started reverse engineering it in little manageable chunks every day. So what I could have done in a month working a full-time job healthy took me 6 months. And that took like everything I had. But I started with some content and I started just putting a few things out, and a community really grew from there, and the information was all very helpful for people. And it just kind of grew from there. I didn't actually expect to want to have anything to do with concussion because at the time I was so sick of trying to explain something that people just didn't want to hear. But then once I got in the community of people experiencing things the way I was, it was really just a lovely group to be around. I called it my little happy corner of the internet. Like, it was just a great community. We did a lot of education stuff. We did a lot of community events, and just through talking to people so often, because I spent a lot of time with people there and building relationships, it became very clear what the gaps were and what people needed. So then I created a program based off of that.
Amazing.
So,
And
now I do all online education, but I didn't expect to do that. But I do love it. And I think that's where I'll be moving forward.
That's amazing. So do you, after like when you stopped working for like other places and were focusing on your recovery, have you had a job since then, like a typical like go to work job?
No, I've done all the online stuff as my job. So I built it up. I was eventually ready to get off disability. So I did do like a return to, ticket to work program. I launched a membership so that I could make the information accessible for people. But also if I had a month where I wasn't feeling well, I had revenue coming in. I think I'd really learned that the world wasn't built for me in the same way it used to be, and that I was going to have to make any sort of job really fit my needs. And what was really important for me is to be able to make my own schedule. When I make my own schedule and then when I'm in charge of what I put on my plate, I do quite well. If that's not the case, that's not the case. So yeah. And so now I'm currently, doing a full, hoping to get up to 40 hours a week and have a kind of typical life. But I think I'm still going to keep those principles of like really making sure that my health is safeguarded and that I have flexibility with what I put on my plate.
Yeah, I love that. I love that what you've made of this. That's really so impressive and amazing. And I think it's really important and good that you are, or helpful for people, I imagine, that you're still on this journey and you're still recovering and are able to share that experience. I think there were a couple of things that I saw from your post recently. Your Instagram is amazing. Everybody should check it out. We'll definitely link it in the show notes, but such good information on there. And kind of what you were just saying kind of leads to this particular post that I was thinking about, but you talked about waking up to really intense symptoms. And I just love for you to share with people, like, how do you manage those hard days that just start out hard like that?
Yeah. I mean, now I'm in a place where I call it my baseline tolerance. I don't tolerate pushing through anymore. I don't tolerate not feeling well. I've kind of set those boundaries for myself that I keep within myself, so that I don't fall back into any old patterns of, pushing through, or I have to do this or things like that. So I really kind of start with, I'm below my baseline tolerance. I'm below like a therapeutic level of recovery. I'm kind of getting over capacity. And so if I feel that in the morning, the first thing I do is I used to work with a lot of chronic pain patients. So I usually make sure I monitor my reaction so that I'm like, symptoms, that's normal. It's my body giving me feedback. I love my body. I'm going to listen. And so I take away any kind of fear or anxiety with that. Because I think that's a very common and easy response and a very human response. So that took time, but just understanding what I'm dealing with, understanding that I'm still safe, and understanding that I'm going to adjust my day to support what my brain and body needs. So that's step one. And then step two, I normally just do a quick check-in. Is there anything I need to support myself? Do I need to have some water, do a gentle stretch, breathe? And then once I feel like I'm in a little better of a headspace, then I look at my day and it's like, okay, what can I take out? What can I cancel? What can I simplify maybe? And what could I maybe delegate to somebody else? And I reduce my day to the point where I can feel my body relax. And I feel like that is totally doable. I'm not like, maybe it's doable. It's totally doable. And then I kind of work through the day that way and make sure I do what I call concussion staples. So your concussion staples are always the way you support your brain, especially when it's needing a little bit of extra love. So that's hydration, it's nutrition, it's sleep, it's mindfulness or meditation, it's getting outside, moving my body in a way that feels good, even if it's just stretching. Those are kind of like the staple things that I know make myself feel good. So that's kind of how I get through the day. I take it down to a level I can do. I'm supporting myself during it. I do what I can. And then I understand that when I do those things, I'm much better in the long run. And it goes back to just not tolerating getting into pushing through too much. And now it's taking longer to get better. You can get in that cycle really easily. I've been really working on this is not how I live. I'm improving. I'm not managing. And so, yeah.
Love that. And everything you just said, just like aligns perfectly with everything that yes, that I'm understanding with this and that I try to teach people as well. I just want to like summarize that again, like help people hear that again, because I love that you started like when you have that, you wake up instead of immediately going to that fear and the like what making it mean something about how the rest of your day is going to be and what your future is going to be. It's like, no, these are symptoms. This is okay. This is my body. I love that you say, I love my body. I'm going to listen to it. It's huge. Those are so important. And so, yeah, starting with that safety and going into your body. And then you mentioned once you've kind of been able to help that a little bit, then you can access that higher thinking and the cognitive part to kind of pace your day, say, okay, this is what is reasonable. This is what I'm going to be able to do today. And then support yourself in that and get your own back with that. Remember that. Yeah. And then I love your concussion staples. Those are so, so important. All of those things. Do you have any like specific or like quick tips on nutrition and or mindfulness that you would like to throw out there for people?
Yeah, I think nutrition, I think we underestimate water. It's low-hanging fruit, guys. Like just getting hydrated, that alone can help reduce some symptoms. So water, I like to put a little lemon and mint in it if I'm like treating myself. So with that, and then just for nutrition for me, it's just whole real food as much as I can. I'll like pack in some brain foods. So like I'll do blueberry. I'll have like little things that I can grab just depending on how I'm feeling. But blueberries, walnuts, anything green, just anything, I just think of it as like nutrients, like just giving my brain all the nutrients it needs, and then trying to reduce any like highly processed type foods and doing that as best I can. There's been very many stages of my recovery where some I didn't have a lot financially, some I didn't have a lot physically where I couldn't cook meals. So I think it's just doing it in a way that serves you and makes you feel like this is a little something I can do for myself, even if it's just 2% more versus I have to do this food and this food and this food and this food and you're killing yourself to do it. It's all within, the idea is all within what you're able to do so that you can feel some expansion versus like that crushing, I need to do all these things.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. That's so important. And I think with the mindfulness, I'm curious with what things have you found? I'm assuming mindfulness is one of them. You can talk a little bit more about that. Yes. But for the autonomic nervous system to help de-stim when you're feeling overwhelmed and overstimulated, what things do you work for you? I love to get these ideas out there for people. Like what are your...
I think if I've learned that it pairs with kind of what state I'm feeling. So if I'm feeling really kind of anxious, I know that means I need to walk or stretch. Like there needs to be some kind of movement. Mm-hmm. If I'm feeling super depressed, that's going to be a happy show. It's going to be breath, and it's going to be some sort of like very, very gentle stretching and just breathing. If I feel like I'm in the place where I'm like, I need to do this, but I can't do this. And I want to do this, but I can't do this. It is just like, I do swaying. I'll sway a little bit. My body really likes that. I do just like breath work with that. I'm just in for a count of 4, out for a count of 6. If I really can't get out of my head, I trace my fingers, just something to get me out of my body. One of my favorite from React is if I'm very internal and I need to like feel more out, I'll blow bubbles.
Love it.
So it's like breath and it's kind of happy. So I'll do that. So those are kind of some of the ways that I support myself through mindfulness. If I haven't slept, I've had insomnia, I'll do a yoga nidra because I'm like, that's going to help restore that a little bit and make me feel like I'm doing something. Anytime I'm really in my head, like a guided meditation with words helps.
Yeah. Fabulous. Oh, those are awesome. I love all those ideas. I haven't had anybody tell me the bubbles a thing before. So that's good. Thank you.
I do like the bubbles.
I'm curious too, how do you said, like, how did you change your mindset? And I imagine it's come from years of experience, but what do you tell people, or what suggestions do you have for people who are in the mindset of, I have to do this? They're like stuck in that, they feel trapped because they don't have any other choice. Like what other than to push through? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think for me, it always helped having another person's feedback. So my psychologist and I would work through that a lot. So that can be really helpful. So getting clear on what's the story you're telling yourself and what's actually reality. And then I would start to ask myself little questions like, well, if I did support myself, what would that look like? If I did stop this job, what could that look like? I don't have to do any of those things, but it just gets me thinking in different ways instead of thinking in this, it has to be this and I have to do that. And if I don't, the world's going to end kind of thing. So it's like, well, is that true? What else could I do? What else would that look like? If I had to tomorrow, how could I make that work? And just getting yourself thinking in different ways kind of gets yourself out of your head. When I was really cognitively compromised, I don't think I had the facility to do that. So having like a psychologist or a friend, someone that could give me, and I would specifically ask, like, can you give me a big picture view and help me see what I'm not seeing? Now I'm able to do that on my own fairly well, but at the time I really couldn't. So that was very helpful. And then it was just the big picture is always, if you don't have your health, you're not going to have the stuff that you want to be able to do in your life. So you have to safeguard that. That has to be a priority. And then I think the second piece of that, when I was feeling, crappy, when I was bedbound all those years, I dove into a lot of, I hate to say, but like self-help books and like personal growth books. And that was huge because a lot of it was just the way I was thinking. So there's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. Like everyone should read that. It doesn't negate what you're going through, but you process in a way that creates different thoughts, and then that creates different behaviors, and then you can connect differently with people. I found that to be huge. I read a lot of Brene Brown. I really you kind of had to face your own bullshit. Like it's all these things that you can get away with when you're healthy. You can people please a little bit when you're healthy. You can kind of push through and maybe not take care of yourself when you're healthy. When you're not, those kind of rules change and you're forced to kind of look at maybe some patterns or some thought processes or some things that aren't serving you. And I think it's helpful to kind of take a look at yourself and be like, how am I, is there things that I can learn and do that are going to create a better life for me? And usually, I do find there are. So that helped me like a ton. I felt like I had a pretty big personal growth journey. It helped me with self-compassion. It helped me with self-worth. And I think now I come from a place of self-compassion and self-worth, and I treat myself differently. So I don't tolerate certain things for myself that I would have maybe tolerated in the past. And I've learned that, those people you're pushing for aren't going to be there when you're bedbound. So was it really worth it? Probably not.
Another excellent point.
Yeah, that was a tough lesson.
Hard-earned experience.
We all learn that now. Yeah.
Oh man. No, that's really helpful, and I think very good points and good advice. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you too about, you had a couple other posts that I saw on your Instagram that I thought were worth mentioning, if you don't mind sharing some of it. You had a post about Peter Pan breathing, and I loved it. So I was hoping you could tell our listeners what that is and why it's helpful.
Yeah. So for Brain Injury Awareness Month, I've been releasing all my little freebies that I've done. So this was the man that I'd seen in Spokane, Myron Thurber, who was the neurofeedback guy, who was the first person who kind of was like, this is what you're dealing with, and here's some data to show it. He used to do a lot of work with the Heart Math Institute. And so he taught me about like quick coherence techniques. And as he was teaching me, he said, think a happy thought. And I always think a happy thought, you can fly like Peter Pan. So I've called it Peter Pan breathing ever since. But essentially what it is that our emotions can create, either smooth or more chaotic rhythms within our heartbeat, within our heart rate variability, within our breath, even our blood pressure. So when we are in a state of like appreciation or gratitude or peace, and you can always feel it in your body, it feels calmer in your body versus when you're in a state of frustration or anger or something like that. So he combined breathing, which we know is a great way to access our autonomic nervous system, to help our bodies calm down, to help our bodies regulate. So we combined something that we know, is impactful, that our breath, and then we combine it with an emotion that we know can also be regulating. And the two together, it's a quick coherence technique, but I call it Peter Pan breathing. So the two together can really help get your nervous system in a state where you can think better, you can connect better, you can heal better. And so that's something that I did during my recovery quite a bit. Anytime I wanted to connect with the people around me, or anytime I was about to do an exercise, my exercises at home from physical therapy or whatever it may be, or if I was in a waiting room going into rehab, I would do this breathing technique for 2 to 5 minutes so that I knew my body was in a calmer state where it was ready to heal a bit better. And that's been one of my favorite things. So we brought that back this week and shared it with the community. And yeah.
I love that. I love it so much. Thank you. And I do think, I don't know, I just love the point of, think a happy thought. I like the Peter Pan connection.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that gratitude, that positive thinking can make such a difference, especially when paired with the breathing. I think that's really, really cool. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And tell us too, if you wouldn't mind, you talked about taking a break. I think this was even after you started the concussion community that you did. You took a break from that and returning to work from there. So what have you learned from that experience that might be helpful for people who are feeling like they're having a setback and have to reset and haven't wanted to?
Yeah, I get that. I think there's a part of it where you kind of have to grieve it a little bit. You can let yourself be upset about it for a short period of time, as long as it feels like you're moving through those emotions rather than you're setting up camp and you're living there. So once you're setting up camp, it's no longer serving you. But I think moving through those emotions can be helpful in the beginning. And then the thing that has always served me is, I would say 2 things. One, it is, what are my priorities? Like, my health is the most important thing. I get really clear on what really matters. And then from there, you can say, okay, here's where I'd like to be. Here's where I am now. What can I do on just a day-to-day basis? What's one thing that I can do, or one choice that I can make that gets me closer to that vision of me in the future? And then I just take it day by day. My therapist used to say, focus what's right in front of your face, because when you're in a setback and you have so far to go, it can feel very daunting. And when it feels daunting, it feels overwhelming. And when we get overwhelmed, we tend to get into a state of inaction. So what I would do, and it has just served me over and over again, is what's right in front of my face. What do I need today? Maybe it's a rest day. Maybe it's a day where I need to move. Maybe it's I make that doctor's appointment. Maybe I really want to sit here and feel sorry for myself, so I'm going to go for a walk. What's just those choices on a day-to-day basis that the person that you want to be would make? Like, I look and I think I'm 100% healthy. I totally respect myself. What's the choice that she would make? And then I make that in real time. And it's just one day at a time. And I feel like that has pulled me out of situations more times than I can count. And not only does it get you out of your setback, but it almost gets you to a different level of yourself. And so I feel like not only can you come out of your setback, but you can come out of it better than you were before. And so I think that's kind of the way to build, like the people say, that highest version of yourself. It's a way to kind of rebuild yourself in a way where you've recovered, but you've also taken the lessons and you're better for it. Kind of like a spiral up, so to speak. So.
Well, I love that, actually. Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me, I have a friend who has also dealt with a couple brain injuries, and she talks about how setbacks for her sometimes, I'll probably mention this again at some point on the podcast, but I like this analogy that she used, that it feels almost like a catapult sometimes. Like you're going backwards and you feel like, no, this is terrible, but then it actually propels you further than you would have been without it. and it can be really good. But, when you're in that backspin part, it might be hard to believe that. But as you move forward, it can help you be further than you would have been otherwise. So
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it just has to be that one day at a time, because when you're in it,
you can't think about that future.
You can't think about it. It's too far. You got to get it a little closer and just make the supportive choices for yourself. And then if you have a day where you mess up, and then you just move on the next day. We're human.
Right. Let's have a lot of compassion for ourselves here. Yeah, I like that, is what's right in front of my face, especially when it's a hard day. Like, okay, we're going to zoom in and like narrow our focus and just what is right now. What can I do? It's so good. Awesome. Thank you. I think we kind of touched on this, but if you have any other thoughts or advice that we haven't mentioned yet for people who are loving and supporting someone with a concussion, I know we talked about, believing them, being open to learning. Is there anything else that you recommend to people as you're doing this program?
I think those are the two biggest things. And then it's kind of learning where you can take things off their plate. Part of concussion is it's a capacity injury. So people don't have enough energy to do all the things they would like to or need to be able to do in a day. So if you can get an understanding of what's kind of pushing them over the edge, that energy really would be better served on letting their body heal, or being in rehab, or maybe spending time with a friend. I think we forget that we're still humans and we need to feel joy and we need to feel a sense of play. And that's part of recovery. That's part of what we need to heal. So it could be something as simple as making the meals, as doing the driving, childcare that's consistent, that they can count on. Anything that really helps reduce their load so that they can put the energy they need to in the things that are going to get them to where we all want them to be, which is, healthy and happy and thriving. That can be really helpful. And then the other thing I would say is just don't compare your healthy person experiences. Like, I used to have a friend that'd be like, "Oh, I'm so tired too." And I was like, well, not the same. not that it's valid that you can feel tired, and we can feel two different types of tired at the same time. But I think letting them have their experiences and knowing it's in a way that's pretty unique to concussion and maybe not what you're experiencing as a healthy person, and both are valid and both can be true at the same time, but not comparing so that we're minimizing, one or the other.
I think that's important. Thank you for bringing
that. Used to drive me nuts.
I can see how that would be. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I would love to hear a little bit more too, if you wouldn't mind sharing how people can find you and what your program offers. Like, how do you help people?
Yeah. So right now, I'm on social media primarily. So particularly Instagram, that's a great place to connect. That's a great place to get a lot of free information. You can sign up for my email list there as well. I operate that on when I feel like there's something really amazing and important and helpful for you, I'll send it out. And when there's not, I won't. It's not a set schedule. So I'm only going to pop in your inbox when it's most helpful for you. And then there is a wait list up for the Concussion Compass community. I'm currently building the second version of the program. So that's still going to be a little bit of a ways away, but I think mostly right now it's the free information. I'm giving a lot of freebies this month, and then just kind of seeing what develops, kind of how I can serve the community the best is where I'm focusing on at the moment. So
tell us what your Instagram is if people want to find you.
It's Molly Parker PT. So it's MOLLY and then PARKER, and then P as in physical, T as in therapist.
Perfect. Excellent. And we will link it in the show notes as well, for sure. Awesome. Is there anything else that you want people to know about your journey or your experience or concussions in general that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
I think just concussions in general, just know that it's treatable. It's not something that we need to live with. I also understand that people are coming from a lot of different backgrounds and have a lot of different accesses to resources that can vary. So just understanding there's a lot you can do to support yourself through pacing and through nutrition and through sleep, through exercise and all those things. And then really focusing on trying to get in with a healthcare provider that understands what you're dealing with. That could be in your area. That could be through telehealth within your state. That could be through online programs, whatever is accessible to you. Ideally, I would love you to have, individualized care. But as we're kind of going through the growing pains of concussion recovery, there's definitely options, I think, for everyone. So I want people to understand that, wherever you're at, there's something for you that you can do to improve your circumstance.
Beautiful. I love it. Amen to that. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate hearing your perspective and your experience. And you have a lot of really, again, hard-earned wisdom about all of this.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've gone through it like that. And even as I was talking, I was like, Jesus.
How did you survive?
How did I do that?
Seriously, though. But I'm so grateful that you did. You survived it, and you're here, and you're not only like, it looks like you're doing so well and thriving. And again, maybe that's a scary thing to say. You're not supposed to say you look like you're doing so well. But actually tell us, do you feel like you're doing well? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. So I'm in LA. I'm in like a cute little place that I love, meeting new people here. I have some family in the area. I'm in rehab twice a week where I'm just doing like hands over fist kind of better every week. They're expecting a full recovery. So I'm able to do things every week and every month that I haven't been able to do in like 13 years. So it just goes to show that it's just never too late. There isn't really a timeline. It's just, can we get the brain the input it needs so it understands how to exist in the world? And I just think it's a testament to how resilient and capable and adaptable we really are. And then it is never too late. So,
yeah, beautiful. And there are still good days and bad days. There's
still good days and bad days. So I'm working 3 days a week right now. I take the Tuesdays and Thursdays off at the moment, and then I'm gradually building those up. But I have built in like cushions for myself. I'm also building in a way where, and I have the ability, I understand that there was a time I didn't, I understand that other people might not, but I'm trying to build up a full life. So not focusing all my energy into work and only work, but build up social relationships and things I do for joy, like painting or music or something like that, and building kind of a really full life and keeping myself feeling full as I'm building. And I'm finding when I do have, an off day, I'm just so much more able to handle it because I'm not trying to pour from something that's so empty. It has enough energy. So I've been really focusing on kind of rebuilding as a whole. And that's been really nice. But yeah, I'm doing well, and I'm hoping to be kind of fully back up and running within a few months.
So amazing. I love it. And it's so beautiful and inspiring, and you're living it, you're doing it. And, if you were to go back 7 years, 6 years, like I imagine the person that you were then would not even probably believe that was even possible, what you are right now. So
yeah, it's hard to imagine when you're in it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so I love this, again, this example that, and proof of what you said, the resiliency of the brain and the body, and like what you can do. So thank you for being here and for sharing this.
Definitely.
I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.